Please welcome to the stage Mike O'Sullivan, GM Product at the Trade Desk and co-founder of Sincera.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike O'Sullivan, and I'm the co-founder of a startup called Sincera. And we were recently acquired by the Trade Desk in what was the Trade Desk's third acquisition, I believe. So today, I want to sort of talk about what were we doing? What was our mission with Sincera? Why did we partner with the Trade Desk? And, what are some of these new core concepts that we're really focused on and that we wanted to sort of partner with the Trade Desk with to have a massive impact on the open internet? So a fun fact, like maybe some companies, maybe Adam at Chalice would agree with this, but like Sincera was entirely founded on, based on annoyance, essentially. We were annoyed by a lot of articles in the press, at the time was about identity, that were just incorrect. Like they weren't quantitatively measured. It was a lot of sentiment, and it was causing downstream impacts to our industry because folks were making business decisions based on this information. So we wanted to create Sincera and really try to get much more quantitative about the open internet and how we can sort of work together. So these are the two concepts, though, that really blend a lot of the metadata and the different data that Sincera collects together, and what I want to talk about today. These two concepts, work in parallel and affect so many decisions that the systems execute across our industry. So to illustrate this, I'm going to go back to our atomic unit in the programmatic advertising, which is the bid request. So the bid request, describes an opportunity that exists. So in this, example, it's describing a dog. But bid requests are small and they're fast, and so they have to remove a lot of contextual information, a lot of, data about what the environment in which the ad is running on. So we still know it's a dog. What we don't know is that the actual premium publisher that this is describing is Reggie, my dog, who's tired from the park. He, is lounging, he's shedding on my couch. There's a huge mess in the background from my daughter, and none of these additional information, he's inside, it's the afternoon, none of this data is on a bid request, right? All of this context, and I'm not sort of talking about context in the category targeting type of way. I'm talking about in the traditional definition of the word. All of this context about the opportunity is lost. So premium publishers have all these amazing attributes and characteristics, but those characteristics are not being transmitted to buyers. So let's sort of dig into this in a little bit more detail. So again, here's our simplified scenario here, right? Again, we don't know much about the dog here. And what's fascinating is if you think about premium publishers, right? A New York Times, a Spotify, the difference between those publishers from a bid request perspective and 4chan is 20 to 40 characters. So our industry has done a really great job at understanding what's quality and what's not based on a very limited amount of data. But we can know a lot more, right? So we can learn a ton about this ad experience, right? It's the richness of the publisher product, and it's putting everything in context of what is around Reggie. How can we make buying decisions with all this information about Reggie without having to necessarily have it on the ad request? So that's what ad experience data is. It's all this sort of contextual, lowercase c, and environmental data that we see at publishers. The supply chain, as I said, works hand in hand as it's, essentially the price you pay and the path it takes for the information to get to you. And it includes the hops on the chain, right? So it can sound like a highfalutin, a master's economic degree, let's understand all this, but it's really not. If you purchase things on Amazon, like you're encountering a highly efficient supply chain, right? So this is the same thing. We want to solve these two problems that exist in our space. Namely, how can we help buyers accurately value premium environments and premium publishers on the open internet? And how can we ensure that we have a high integrity supply chain so we know exactly how much working media is making it from the buyer to that publisher? When we think about, this, and when people talk about our industry, they often talk about, the 4D chess game of DSPs and SSPs and that kind of thing. And it's fascinating to look at the data. Today, there are 169 SSPs or intermediaries that have 2,000 or more publisher deployments. So let's take one example of a company called AdaptMX. AdaptMX, 4 or 5 years ago, they had under 2,000 deployments. And now they have over 100,000 deployments. So that's the supply side, or the intermediary side, for SSPs and other types of intermediaries. And then on the buy side, in the last 5 years, we've actually lost number of DSPs, right? And if I was talking to a publisher, and their guidance to me and their feedback to me is like, well, we basically have 2 DSPs that make up somewhere between 80 and 90% of our ad spend, and then the next 10 DSPs make up the last 10% to 15%. So is it really this game of like 4D chess? Like, what explains what's happening in our ecosystem? We're seeing this explosion of intermediaries, and we're seeing contraction on the buy side. More and more spend is coming into our space every year, but our premium publishers are not seeing that, the impact of the growth of our space, right? I want to be clear, though, I don't think, and I'm not saying that all intermediaries or all partners are bad. There are so many problems that we need to solve in our industry that, there's space for a huge plethora of companies. But it's really, really critical that the companies that participate in the supply chain are not taking out more value than they're adding in. We have to really investigate and find these events that take out a disproportionate amount of value and working media dollars. So from a Sincera perspective, for the first time, I think, we can see this data. This is the data that we wanted to partner with the Trade Desk with, and why we were so interested in working together, because we now can understand these supply chains at a quantitative level. It's not just sort of like atmospherically, what do we feel like's happening? We know what's happening. And how do we use this data to help marketers and media buyers have more of their working dollars getting to publishers? How do they understand, exactly what's going on with their campaigns, and how do we help them make sure that, like I said, as much as possible, that if there is intermediaries and partners, they understand what they're getting in return for their share of that media dollar. So if we keep going and think a little bit more about, that's the supply chain. That's the transactions, that's value. And if we look to the second piece of what we wanted to talk about today around ad experiences, it really comes down to this concept of quality. How do we think about quality as it relates to programmatic? So it's funny, I've spent my entire career working in programmatic media. That's all I've ever worked in. And I've worked at a bunch of different companies, before starting Sincera. And I know how so many of these different systems think about quality. And every company has some form of this approach. Every technology company has some form of this approach. We have all this supply, and we have a system by which we sift through this supply, and we weed out, really bad stuff. We weed out, file sharing and pornography and, some sort of like hate speech and whatever that may be. But the thing is, no one built anything that targets and understands high-quality media, right? So you end up in this situation where there's nothing that really explains, like, how does this system think about quality premium publishers and inventory? Because the value is not just described by the absence of bad. Like, who is excited as a media buyer to be like, hey, I got my report. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Like, where did I end up running? And then your partner, technology partner goes, well, you didn't run on any terrorism videos. And it's like, okay, like, can we aim a little higher here? Like, what is it, like, where are we running? Like, what's the properties? And it's crazy, like, because, like, value here is defined by the presence of really good, of really premium publishers. And sort of like, what do those look like? So there are many, many signals that go into ad experience, right? It's not like viewability was before, where we had this one metric that could be gamed and it could be manipulated. Like, ad experience comprises many metrics, but I'm going to talk about one of them right now, and I'm going to illustrate how it can be used to both identify high-quality premium opportunities and premium publishers, as well as low-quality. I think if most people were to look at this web page, they would be like, this feels like MFA. And then, like, someone would get into a debate. It's like, well, what is MFA? Exactly, I read content like this. Like, what is it? And what's the nature of the universe? And, like, all these sort of questions. And it's just exhausting for anyone who's ever participated in these conversations on either side. But, the only reason we're having those conversations is because we have no way to really put the ad opportunity in context. It just looks like any of these squares would be this independent bid request, right? But if we look at a metric like ads to content ratio, it can take a look at this particular environment and say, hey, the max A2CR of what we see here is 58%. And the average number of ad units in view is almost 4, the max is almost 5, and the ads are overlapping and colliding with each other. So it's like, I don't care if this is MFA, call it, categorize it, whatever you want. I just know as a media buyer, I don't want it. And so what's interesting here is, like, I did say it was one metric, but you can actually see there's 3. And what's super fascinating, like, as I said before, where it's like, yes, obviously you can see how this would identify a low quality environment. You could take these same metrics and look at the New York Times homepage from yesterday. And that too would actually have almost a 60% A2CR value. And so you might be like, well, but, like, hold on, this is the whole problem you're supposed to be avoiding with these new things. It's like, now they look the same. It's like, well, the New York Times has a 60% A2CR, but it has 1 ad unit in view for the takeover, right? And there's no collisions. So you've now got an awesome ad experience, right, as measured on the New York Times, because you have this big, rich takeover versus all of these colliding ad units that are cluttering the page. We can also do things like, hey, are there multiple videos playing back simultaneously on this property? I don't want my media campaigns and my media dollars running against those types of scenarios. Like, what kind of dystopian future is it where people are watching, like, multiple videos simultaneously? It's just like, I don't want to sign up for that. So again, we've got our example of how the bid request is coming to the buying system, but we have all of these additional metrics that sit atop that allow us to understand and contextualize and allow both the system as well as buyers themselves understand more and target more around these premium publishers that really highlight the best of the open internet. And so, this data is already live today. A lot of this data is what went into the powering the Global 100 from Trade Desk, as well as the SP 500 Plus, that uses many of these signals. And when you have multiple signals, you end up in a place where it's, they sort of interconnect and weave together. It's very difficult to goal seek against any of these types of, any one of these signals, because another different signal will see it. You really just have to focus on quality experiences. And so to recap, there's 4 elements here on ad experiences. Like, it allows for higher fidelity of understanding of the environment. It makes it much harder to trick or game. provides a bunch of new controls if you're the type of user who wants to sit in the F-16 cockpit. And if you're not, you're like, I don't want to worry about this. It's like, great, there's automated tools for it too. And then finally, we're ensuring that we've got this contract where, like, if buyers want to connect with premium inventory, they can do it programmatically. The sort of final point I want to make about supply chain integrity as well as ad experience is that this is not just a job for me. Like, as I said, I've worked in this space my entire career, and for my entire career, there's been this explosive growth of digital advertising, and yet the number of journalists that are employed is plummeting. And this is a trend, like, I think we have to reverse, and this is why I think the open internet matters, why digital advertising matters, is because it's affecting our society, right? It affects our ability to have, a heterogeneous mix of different voices and perspectives. It allows creatives to, write and film and release new content. Like, it's really, really important that we connect smart, intelligent, well, redundant, but both of those characteristics, we connect media buyers with these premium publishers that are employing journalists, right? Allow them to have the funds to actually hire more folks, to create and release new content. And that involves cleaning up the supply chain. And what's so unique about this opportunity, and why, candidly, we sold the company to the trade desk, is because this is like such a rare opportunity. It's truly a win-win, which is like a trite thing to say, and like Will Doherty says it all the time, but like I'll say it anyway. Because like, if we clean up the supply chain, buyers will pay less for their campaigns, and publishers will make more, right? There's still there's still space for different tools and systems to work with the ecosystem. Sincera was an example of one such company. But you can work towards this future. Like, we can make this happen. With the data that both Sincera and Trade Desk have, as well as the scale, this is possible. And, I have 2 kids. As I said before, I, was raised with an open internet. I love to read and explore and find new things. I want them to grow up in a world where there's lots of journalism, where there's, different types of reporting, different voices. Like I said, actors and writers and directors, people can make content. I don't want them to be in a world where everything is locked up and, you have to watch it in 45-second increments, and you can't spell certain words because a censor from a foreign country will demonetize your video. Like, this is really, really important to me, and like, we've basically bet everything on it. When it comes to the supply chain and ad experience, I don't know if we don't get this right. Like, essentially, my kids probably will have I'll have to real matzo ball on my hands with my wife, because I'm like, I don't know how we're putting these kids into college. So we have to solve this. But I don't really feel like it's a crazy bet, because I've seen the data. I've seen the supply chain data. I see how much is coming out of these transactions. I see how much media buyers are spending on their campaigns, and I see how much publishers are getting paid. There is an opportunity to reward great publishers and for buyers to have high-performing campaigns. I would say that the last thing is, sometimes people say, oh, this fucking guy, like, now I have 2 new things I need to worry about. I want to let you know, like, you don't necessarily need to worry about these things. This is a positive. These are only possible on the open internet. Having this awareness of the supply chain, understanding and valuing a publisher's, environment and the context in which ad opportunities exist. Like, there's still ads in walled gardens. You just know nothing about this. So, like, yes, there can be more conceptual, new concepts that we discuss that you don't on sort of black boxes and things that just run on autopilot. But does that mean there's no margin extraction? Disproportionate margin extraction? Does that mean it's an amazing ad experience? No. These are only possible on the open internet. And Sincera would never be able to exist were it not for an open internet. So I know I've made a lot of claims, sort of about the supply chain and the opportunities for both buyers to have higher performing campaigns and publishers to earn more. So I'm not asking you to necessarily trust me on this, like just hold up. We're just really excited to take this data and to build great things and to show you what it looks like. And with that, I hope you guys had a great day, and I'll see you out in the lobby.